Hello, Indian Creek 8th graders. This is Mrs. Stirk again with the third installment of our Native American Struggles series. In part 3, we are going to talk about the tragic end to the Sioux resistance against the US government. The Dawes Act was yet another US government policy change in 1887. And the goal was another attempt to civilize the Native Americans, to force them into accepting the European idea of private property and individualism. So their plan was to break up the reservations and give plots of land to individual Native Americans. But of course, surprise, the whites took the best land and gave the natives worthless plots that you could not use at all. Another part of the Dawes Act was the reservation schools. This was to further destroy the culture, and they kidnapped hundreds of Indian children from their families and forced them to live at these reservation schools, where they could re-educate the savage out of them and teach them to be civilized, which just meant to live like white people. This did destroy families and further weaken the culture of the Native Americans. In response to this, along with all of the other atrocities, was the ghost dance, which was a religious movement started by the vision of a Paiute medicine man, Wovoka, and it described an Indian savior or Messiah type figure. In the vision, the Messiah promises paradise, says that all the whites will disappear, the dead American Indians will come back to life, and the buffalo will return if they do this special ghost dance that this vision teaches them how to do in order to bring this paradise about. And this became an obsession. It was the last hope and desperation of the Native Americans, because at this point there had been so much death and slaughter that most of them knew more people who were dead than who were alive. So, this ghost dance movement grows rapidly. And meanwhile, the whites' reaction to this is they're pretty spooked. They think that their efforts to civilize the Native Americans have backfired and that the natives have all just lost their minds. But really, they were just really sad and feeling hopeless. So, the white solution to this is to outlaw the ghost dance. And then they arrest Sitting Bull, thinking that he is one of the people continuing this movement and propagating it, even though that wasn't even true. And in the attempt to arrest him, Sitting Bull is shot and killed in a scuffle. That brings us to Wounded Knee, which is the most tragic event, I think, in this whole entire history. So, the 7th Cavalry, which is the same regiment from Little Bighorn, rounded up starving and freezing Sioux ghost dancers, because they're this big threat, the ghost dancers, they think. And the soldiers demand that they turn over all of their weapons. And they go through and they search all the teepees, and not only do they make this big pile of all of the guns that they have, but they take their cooking supplies and their sewing supplies as well. Well, according to the book Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, what happens is an argument breaks out between a confused, deaf Native American who doesn't understand exactly what's going on and the soldiers, and shots were fired. Nobody knows who shot first, and different accounts say different things, but this is what happens. A massacre. The U.S. soldiers then shot and killed. They just started shooting after that first shot was fired, and they just kept on shooting until about 300 unarmed Native Americans are dead. Over half of them were women and children and babies. And remember that they had just taken everything that they had. There were no weapons. They were completely unarmed. This is the last major encounter between Native Americans and U.S. soldiers, and after that, they lost hope, and they went to the reservations. And that is really the end of the story of the resistance of the Native Americans against the U.S. government. But the tragedies are not over. They're far from over, because from then till now, there are still complete injustices happening. For example, one of the most outrageous recent issues is the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock, and the mistreatment of the protesters attempting to protect their own land, yet again from being taken over by whites for monetary reasons. In addition to that, there's also social injustice, such as the disparity between what life is like on reservations as opposed to the national average, as you can see here in this graph. In addition to that, there's really high drug abuse and suicide and depression among Native Americans. And also they have to endure continued racism from people who tried to wipe out their entire existence in the form of being used as mascots and as Halloween costumes and other totally ridiculous things. So, all food for thought, and thank you for watching. I'm sorry that was so depressing, but it's kind of hard to be not depressing when you talk about the Native Americans and what happened to them. So, talk to you next time. Thanks very much.